Hello, I'm Bob Ward from Microsoft, a principal architect on the Azure Data team. What does it mean to modernize an application or your data? How can you ensure you get the maximum value out of your current infrastructure or the use of cloud services? Today, I'm going to show you how Azure databases can help you modernize, but do it in an efficient, cost-effective manner to optimize access to your data. And hey, be sure to stick around for the end of today's session to see a demo. So here's questions that people ask me all the time. It's very common questions from customers. What about compliance? Is my data trusted in the cloud? Is it siloed? Is it isolated? How much spend am I currently making with my data platform? And how can I actually save money by maybe making a cloud migration or even using hybrid services? And is SQL Server on premises still an option for me? Can I do both? Can I run SQL Server in my environment and also in the cloud? Can I connect them together? Can I connect SQL data now with things running in a hybrid way? And most importantly, I hear customers saying, I got to get faster. I need to get faster insights to the data I have. I need intelligence over all the things I'm doing because data is coming in from everywhere. So these are the kind of questions we see today when people are talking about modernization. Now, if you think about modernization and you think about going to something that's new, you want to make sure that things are stitched together and feel integrated. And so we believe the Microsoft Intelligent Data Platform does give you that. It is how Azure knows best to modernize your application and your data. If you think about today, in today's society, today's industry, it's all about a feedback loop of data. It's about signals coming from everywhere as all part of our lives, all part of our businesses, all part of applications, and actions that we take on it. And so those actions have to be smart. You need to start using things that are intelligent to process data in a very, very fast way, but do it efficiently, things that allow you to modernize your actual business. And so as people talk to me about reasons they might want to modernize, here's some examples. Data center contract expiry is certainly one of those. Customers looking at data centers and how do I maybe leave an entire data center? How do I take future data centers and thinking about moving those things to the cloud? How about integration of acquisitions? Customers happening today in mergers of companies, and they got to find a way to not only make it a seamless operation to acquire or merge from their company, but to access all the data and applications they use in a way that's cost effective. And then security threats and compliance are huge. That is becoming certainly a critical part of our industry today, critical part of data. And so if you think about operational data, you think about governance, analytics, and AI, I cannot afford for these solutions to be disparate. I need something to be integrated because of all these different challenges that we're facing. And so if you think about the Microsoft Intelligent Data Platform, it now becomes this interwoven, integrated experience of cloud services and even hybrid services. And it deals with how you have operational data integrated with analytics and AI, all governed by a common security platform. So when we say intelligent data platform, what we mean is a platform for data to be integrated in a way that's intelligent, allow you to make decisions very quickly, modernize your business, modernize your applications. Let's look at examples about how the platform actually works. So if you think about operational databases, they could exist in infrastructure as a service, could be platforms as a service, could be in some hybrid way. I need to make sure that I have analytics, intelligence, things like Power BI, machine learning, and Synapse Analytics that can integrate easily with that operational data sources. I may need to offload some of my application workloads, my queries, my reports from these operational systems into analytics and AI systems, but it needs to be seamless. I need to do it very an easy way. And I need a governance system on top of all of this. So Microsoft Purview and services like Defender can provide those insights and governance services that can do that. And so look at the stories that's woven together. It's the best in Azure. In fact, we love to make sure that you understand that customers have to really do this. Atrium's one of them. Atrium took a look at our Synapse Link for SQL service, operational data showing up either in SQL Server or an Azure database in the cloud, and easily integrating that with Synapse for near real-time analytics. You're going to hear more about Synapse Link for SQL later in today's session. So this is just an example of how, when you're thinking about modernization, you need to make sure that the cloud services, the data, the applications, the analytics, the governance, have an integrated story together, not something that's disparate. You don't need to do a lot of the work here. You need the services to do a lot of work for you. Okay, so you've learned a little bit about the Microsoft Intelligent Data Platform, what that is. But here's a phrase we've been using recently with customers. We want them to do more with less. We want you to achieve more with what you're doing this modernization journey, but save money while you're doing it. What does that look like? There are 3 ways. One is you need to be able to migrate and save costs to actually do the migration. Who wants to migrate and actually spend more money? Number 2, you need to optimize when you're in Azure. Like, I don't want to just move to the cloud and that's all I do. I need to get more from it. Again, do more, but do it in a cost-efficient manner. So I need to learn how to optimize my investments, my deployments, my applications and data once I've made that migration into Azure, or even using hybrid services. And finally, I need to reinvest. I need to make sure that I'm reusing my existing skills. So if you think of these 3 areas, it's migrate, save costs, it's optimize, and reinvest. So if you think about those 3 things we talked about, migrate to save cost, optimize, and reinvest, here's some kind of examples of what we mean by that. So we have seen independent studies show that our Azure databases can actually save you money when you migrate from where you are today into the cloud, or even use hybrid services compared to the competition. We've seen for services like Defender, that's a great example of optimization. Defender always kind of looking out for the investments you have, whether that be in cloud or hybrid, looking for things like vulnerabilities based on industry-known benchmarks, and even doing advanced security threat detections, things like SQL injection attacks, or maybe some brute force denial of service attack. Defender can look across all of your assets and alert you to these kind of type situations. And a great example of how when you do make that move to the cloud, whether you connect existing assets in a hybrid way, or actually put your assets in Azure, how a valued service like Defender can give you that optimization that you need, that extra added value. And then you want to be able to reuse your existing skills. I mean, if I have all these skills today I'm applying to my databases, if I make this migration to Azure, do I have to just learn everything again, start over? No, you want to reuse your existing skills today to keep investing or reinvest into new applications, new parts of your business, and grow. I don't want to have to spend time relearning a bunch of stuff again just to make that move. I want to take advantage of the knowledge I have today and then go forward with it to the future. You know, I started in 1993 with Microsoft talking SQL. Wow, that's like 30 years now. I never thought I would show something like what you're seeing right here. The fact that SQL runs on all edges and all clouds. It runs on the edge and IoT devices. A new version of SQL Server 2022 just released last November. It runs on Linux, Kubernetes, containers, anywhere you need it. In fact, there are hybrid servers with Azure Arc where you can connect existing SQL resources to a cloud. Or you can get the experience of a cloud running your own infrastructure with platforms as a service, something called Azure Arc enabled SQL managed instance. And then, of course, our cloud services, whether it's virtual machines, databases, or managed instances, provide you that ultimate platform service experience so you can maximize your investment as you're modernizing. Now, here's the thing that's difficult when you look at this right now. Customers have said to me, you know, this is an and story for me, Bob, not an or. I may need to run SQL Server 2022 in some environments where I want it. I may need to run Linux in some environments. I may use containers for development. I may do some things in a hybrid way to take advantage of that great connectivity with Azure. And then some assets I do want to put in the cloud. But remember we just talked about reinvesting and growing? I don't have to learn a bunch of new skills to do that. So it's the same engine. The same query processor runs across this. It's the same T-SQL language, the same tools. I can connect the most popular tool in the world for SQL, Management Studio, across all of these things anytime I need to. And if I'm a developer, I don't want to write code a bunch of times to connect to these things. So we believe that the SQL Edge to Cloud story is develop once and deploy anywhere with that great flexibility. So let's talk a little bit more about SQL technologies and how it can help you do this in this modernization journey. So first of all, we think Azure SQL is uniquely differentiated. Even though SQL runs on all edges, all clouds, we still believe Azure is the best cloud for SQL. Why is that? Well, if you think about Azure Database, it provides a new and unique experience called hyperscale and serverless. In fact, we've just combined those together. Imagine going and saying, I'd like a database and I don't even know how many cores I need for my queries. I don't know how much storage I need. Can't you just figure that out? And can't you just scale my app as I need, as I grow? That's what hyperscale and serverless technologies can do. It's also efficient because it's only going to have you pay for the core and storage you need when you need it. You're a startup? No problem. We'll just set up a smaller database environment for you and deploy it. And as you grow your business and app, you don't change the app. We just scale the back end to scale the needs of the app and the business. We talked about some of the cost savings you can get from running Azure SQL in the cloud compared to the competition. This is a very interesting one because this independent study showed not only were we allowed to save you money, but faster than running in these other cloud environments and giving you richer platforms of service database capabilities. Now, we know that your data has to be there and always available and reliable. The business continuity story of Azure SQL is amazing. Imagine when you deploy a database or an instance, all of a sudden, your databases are automatically backed up. You can keep them around for 10 years if you need to. You have an SLA, a service level agreement for uptime, 4.5 nines even in some cases. So if you want to make sure that you're going to run SQL in a production way in a cloud, Azure SQL is differentiated to do that with our business continuity story. And then I need to make sure whatever I'm doing is ready to go hybrid. We talked about this and story I just mentioned, edge to cloud. I need a consistent experience when I'm running SQL in my infrastructure, in other environments, or in the cloud itself. And our hybrid story is going to actually give you that. And if you're thinking about how to migrate, like maybe I do want to migrate a SQL server into Azure, I need the tools and the programs available. We're going to show you at the very end of this discussion how we have those for you today that are going to make that migration journey a little bit easier for you. And all together for Azure SQL, think about this. It's a unified management story. Did you know that you can go into an Azure portal or through scripts and command lines and see all of your assets called SQL Edge to Cloud, whether running in the cloud or hybrid? You can see them in a consistent way. You can get free inventory across all these assets just by using and connecting to Azure. And did you also know that machine learning is built into the engine? You can do machine learning services to run your machine learning models on any SQL that we provide edge to cloud. And then, of course, we talked about advanced security, but you may not even be aware that today we have a blockchain in SQL, something called Ledger. Ledger provides a blockchain set of technologies inside the database engine. So now you have that centralized experience for tamper evidence, proof of data tampering in your database. So together, we think Azure SQL is a great story, and Azure being the best place to run SQL in the cloud. So speaking of security and advanced security, because that's top of mind for many, many customers who are thinking about this modernization journey, I got to make sure that I can do things innovative. We just mentioned machine learning, or I can do things like Synapse Link to secure and my analytic data, but it has to be secure. And you think about these categories. You think about access management authentication. Did you know that Azure Active Directory is now enabled in everything we have called SQL, even in SQL Server 2022? Why do you care? You get multi-factor authentication out of that. So now you can do a multi-factor authentication system with any SQL asset you have. And you need to make sure that your data is well protected. So we have the best encryption scheme, I believe, in the industry, including end-to-end encryption, connection encryption, encryption at rest, and even dynamic data masking so that applications don't have to actually mask data within their code. And we just mentioned Ledger, a blockchain inside SQL Server. We've even had customers use Ledger in supply chain scenarios because you have that decentralized system of supply chain, but you need to actually find a way to trust that the data has not been tampered and valid, and Ledger gives you those capabilities. And you need to make sure that if you're going to go inside the cloud, that your data is secure from a network perspective. And we have all the different options available to you, including now a private link option for both Azure Database and Managed Instance. And you think about governance, you need to make sure you have a way to not just classify your data, but have an essential way to govern it. Our new Purview access policies allow you to set up rules and policies in a single place and publish those to any SQL asset so that you can control who has permissions to your data in a very controlled central way versus you having to worry about all the different SQL assets and you maintaining and managing that. And then we kind of mentioned Defender a little bit for SQL. It's top of the industry, based on industry benchmarks, to look for things like vulnerability assessments based on your configuration. Did you know that I've worked with a customer recently that turned this on and found out that the sysadmin account, the famous account called SA, was enabled on half their SQL assets? They didn't even know it. Defender was able to actually detect that. Or looking for things like a brute force attack against their SQL server or a SQL injection. Or how about like unrecognized logins from different sources around the world that they didn't really normally have against their application? Defender can do all of those things, and it is a great cloud service that works with any SQL asset we have today, not just in Azure itself. So that's a great story in security, and it is a way, by the way, that you can look at your modernization journey and have more assurances, because we talked about business continuity, but now you have this assurance that security is a great part of your story and that your data is well secured wherever you're going to run SQL, especially running it in the cloud. So that's a security story. Very important for you to make sure that you feel comfortable your data is well secured in the cloud. Now, the Azure SQL story is great. Azure is the best cloud to run SQL. But what if you can't run SQL in the cloud? Like, wouldn't you like a cloud experience to be available to you in any infrastructure that you actually have or any cloud? Well, we have that. In fact, this is based on customer demand. Back when we were still working in this cloud migration journey, customers told us, I want to get to the cloud someday, but I can't do it yet. Can you give me some of that thing you've built into the cloud where I want to run it? And we call that Azure Arc Enable SQL Managed Instance. And that cloud experience looks like this. Number one, it's versionless, no more patching. So we will give you a versionless SQL server to keep you up to date with all the latest innovations, all the fixes, and apply it on the maintenance schedule that you tell us, but you don't have to actually go through the patching schedule yourself. So now that feels more like what you're getting in an Azure SQL experience. You can deploy in seconds. You can deploy from the portal. You can scale in seconds. In an online experience, you can actually scale the resources you need in your environment without any kind of doing migration operations of your database or your instance. And again, we mentioned about unified management earlier. Because you're connected to Azure, you can take advantage of our inventory services or other services like log analytics to get that unified look at this SQL instance plus all your SQL instances edge to cloud. We talked about Defender. We talked about all those great security services, all of that packed in to an Azure Arc managed instance, including things like Active Directory authentication. And then finally, one of the things customers told us was, well, I know I'm going to run this in my infrastructure, but can I pay you with an Azure subscription instead of SQL license? You can. And in fact, did you know you can do a developer edition of this? You can actually go develop for free on your SQL license, an Azure Arc managed instance, make sure you're comfortable with it. Then you would declare and say, well, I'm ready to be billed by Microsoft on a monthly basis based on my core usage. And you can even apply Azure Hybrid Benefit to this, just like you could do in the cloud today. So we think Azure Arc Managed Instance is a great new opportunity for customers to get the cloud experience of platforms as service. But again, any infrastructure, any cloud, they'd like to do that. And it's connected to Azure, so it's got the hybrid capabilities we've been mentioning. Now, earlier on, we talked about the Microsoft Intelligent Data Platform. And remember, that story is integration, operational databases, analytics, governance, tied together, feels very integrated. Synapse Link for SQL is a great story. Atrium was a customer you saw earlier in our presentation actually talk about this. Now, think about this scenario. I've got a SQL server, or I've got an Azure database, and it's operational data, right? I'm always hitting transactions on it. I have some queries I don't want to run, some read-only operations, but yeah, I've heard of Synapse. It's got great capabilities for machine learning, Spark, integrates Power BI. It's an analytic platform. How do I tie those together? Well, today you'd have to write ETL jobs yourself and manually copy data in a quite frankly, not a very real-time scenario. Synapse Link for SQL allows you to declare a database in SQL or Azure SQL database, link it to Synapse, and then the engine automatically picks up changes in a change feed fashion in your database, feeds them into the Synapse system automatically. It's ingested. And now your Power BI reports, your analytics are all integrated now with that operational story. And this is done automatically for you. So there's some setup involved to link them together, but at that point, it's hands-free. And now you get what we call a near real-time analytics story. So that's called Synapse Link for SQL, linking operational databases with analytics. Works today for SQL Server 2022 and for Azure SQL. Now, one of the last things I want to talk about in this modernization journey before we wrap up is Azure SQL Managed Instance. Hey, we promised you at the beginning there'd be a demo, right? So we're going to do a demo for you. But first, let me set up the demo. And let me set it from this perspective. If you think about what we've been talking about modernization, we talked about migration, optimization, reinvest. Managed Instance is a great example of that. So first of all, there's a new simple online migration story for Azure SQL Managed Instance from SQL Server with a lot less downtime and a great modernization, do more with less story by shifting read workloads while you migrate. And then it's compatible. And we'll show you in the demonstration why it is very compatible to the SQL Server you know and love today. You want to optimize costs? No problem. It supports things like Azure Hybrid Benefit to use your existing SQL licenses. You can even pause it if you don't want to save on compute costs. And it has built-in high availability. We talked about business continuity, even if you didn't have it in your existing SQL Server. But you need to make sure in this modernization journey that it adapts to your needs. Like once you get into the cloud, I need to adapt what's going on in my business. So we'll talk and show you things like maintenance windows and notifications. We'll talk about how you can move to a new service tier like business critical with a very, very simple operation online, very little downtime. And then you can even extend your managed instance across the world in something called auto failover groups. Now, you want to take that investment you've made and you want to extend it. I want more in the cloud. So we'll talk about how you can use things like Defender and Azure Active Directory, how a concept called intelligent query processing can get you faster with no code changes. And finally, a really powerful story of data virtualization, how to like to integrate your SQL with data lakes out there with Parquet. We'll show you that as well. Okay, now you get a feeling of those 5 areas that you can use managed instance to modernize your SQL investment. So let's go see it in action. If you want to run the full demo yourself, you can go to ak.ms/SQL demo. There's all the code for you to run through all the pieces I'm about to show you. Let's look at the demo now. Okay, let's first start by showing that online migration story. Now, I've already synchronized a SQL Server 2019 instance that I have with an Azure SQL managed instance. You can see right here that the database is synchronized. And you know what? Using this link feature for managed instance, it built an AG for me. So I have an availability group already built, and the database has been synchronized on the managed instance side. You can also see here, I'm using standard edition. This even works how to migrate a standard edition to managed instance. Now, I'm showing you here that my connection SSMS is to the read-write. I'm the primary, and the other connection is to the managed instance, and I've synchronized my data. It's about 1,000 rows. So let me kick off a write workload on SQL Server and show how I can shift my read workload while I'm migrating to managed instance. Imagine that. So I'm doing this migration. It could take you months, but while I'm doing the migration, I can actually use the managed instance as a read replica, because guess what? An AG was built for us automatically, and I can read, even I'm using standard edition in SQL 19. So I'm going to stop that write workload and kind of capture a snapshot of my read workload, because now I'm going to do the migration. So in the migration over here, I can use SSMS to use a wizard to go click on a database and fail over to the managed instance. And when I do this failover, it's going to perform the online migration. Since we're using availability group technology, this online migration can be extremely fast, because all I need to do is stop my write workload in SQL Server, and that's like a planned failover as you see here. I'll confirm it's stopped. The wizards in SSMS will make sure the data is actually synchronized and then go through and finish the process. And think of this now as switching the primary from SQL 19 over to managed instance. So once this is done, I should be able to go back and run some queries here and see, has this been failed over? So in SSMS, you see I'm connected to managed instance, but the database is now read-write. I could even flip over and start my write workload again directly against managed instance. So I could come over here to this window, click on this, and boom, I can go click and run a write workload there. So I've done an online migration and switched over to managed instance. That is now the primary for my workload. Now, once I'm there, let me flip back over to the portal and show you, I want to optimize my investment. And an example of that is start, stop. Look at this new option in managed instance. I can stop my instance of Azure SQL, and I'm going to be able to save on compute costs, because I'm not going to pay for those compute costs or the SQL license costs while it's actually stopped. But you may be wondering, like, well, I don't want to do it manually, because I can script that if I want to, but how do I do it kind of more of on a scheduled basis? You can do that. We have an option you can see here in the portal. If I click on Start, Stop, Schedule, and I've already picked a schedule. So now I've set up a schedule to say, look, I'm not going to use the managed instance over the weekend. So can you go ahead and stop it on, say, Friday afternoon or Friday evening and start it up again early Monday morning when my users come in? You can pick any type of schedule you'd like to do. In fact, you can even have a different schedule per day and in any time zone factor you'd like to use. So start, stop, a great example of how to optimize my investment once I've migrated to managed instance. Now, I'd like to be able to have my managed instance, so let me rapidly adapt to my business needs. And an example of that is auto failover group. I've already configured a second managed instance in a different region, in this particular case, the West US, and I've synchronized the two managed instances. So now I've got an abstracted read-write endpoint that's like a listener to my primary, which is in the East US, and a read-only to the West US. So now I can extend my read workloads to another managed instance. And these instances can fail back and forth to each other depending on the state of the managed instance. So auto failover groups allow you to extend your managed instance scenarios to adapt to the needs of your business for redundancy or to extend your read workload. And then finally, I told you I want to extend my investment. So intelligent query processing is a perfect example of that. Works in SQL, works in managed instance. And you can see right here, I've got a stored procedure that when I run it, it's going to use something called an index scan. That's appropriate because there's a lot of rows to go get for that stored procedure. But when I run the same stored procedure with a different parameter value, it also uses a scan. And that's not good because it only needs a few rows. That's called parameter sniffing. So parameter-sensitive plan optimization is enabled by simply turning on a database compat level. No code changes. Now when I go run the scan for this particular parameter value, it does use a scan. That's normal. But if I run the other stored procedure, the same stored procedure with a different parameter value, I now get an index seek. I get now two plans for the same stored procedure, allowing now the engine to adapt to my workload instead of me having to do a lot of query tuning, and I made no code changes to do it. The final example is data virtualization. I'm flipping over here to another computer I've got connected to that managed instance. Look at this. I'm using the open rowsense syntax to go to an Azure Blob Storage account and looking at Parquet data as a table. You can see the results right there. I can query Parquet tables using T-SQL in the engine. I can even use a built-in function to go see what are their Parquet files in my system. A great example of using data virtualization to integrate a managed instance with a data lake. Look at what we just showed you. Online migration. We allowed you to optimize. We allowed you to adapt to your business needs and even extend your investment in the cloud with managed instance. Well, hope you like that demonstration to see the power of Azure SQL Managed Instance. Let's take a look at how one of our customers is taking advantage of faster failovers to managed instance, along with other great features of SQL Server 2022, such as Synapse Link for SQL.
MSC is the largest container ship operator in the world. We have a large presence around the world. Our fleet of vessels counts more than 700. We are really at the core of the world commerce. For a single shipment, you can have up to 38 different parties that are involved in this transaction. Each one of them will require information for at the quotation level, booking, documentation, invoicing, etc. Without solid IT services, nothing of this kind would be possible.
With SQL Server 2022, we are trying to cover the three main pillars of availability, performance, and security. Being able to have degree of parallelism feedback and cardinality estimation feedback in our user databases is going to be huge. Additionally, parameter-sensitive plan optimization is something that we are foreseeing as a huge benefit in our existing workload. With Synapse Link for SQL, we will be able to replace our existing ETL processes and being able to have almost real-time synchronization of our critical operational tables in Synapse in a matter of seconds, and from there, being able to do all the analytics that we do today and more. Adding a managed instance into the existing availability solution that we have will give us an additional benefit in terms of being able to easily fail over to a managed instance in case of a major disaster. We will be able to use managed instance as a read-only replica to put our read-only workload against a managed SQL service. We are definitely looking forward to use SQL Server Ledger features to enhance all our security footprint. Having the integration with Azure Active Directory within SQL Server 2022 will help us to enhance our security authentication with the clients and the users that we have at MSC.
Without SQL Server, we wouldn't be on where we are in terms of IT. And with the SQL Server 2022, we continue down the same path of increasing the capability, the performance of the solution, allowing us to keep growing the success of our business.
Well, there you have it. One of my favorite parts of this job is seeing customers take advantage of product innovation and applying it to the real world. You know, as we end today, I want to make sure you know that there's great tools for migration itself to Azure. One of those is Azure Migrate, a central hub for all your migration needs. We just recently announced some innovations for Azure Migrate specific to SQL, including the ability to detect availability installations in your environment, like clusters and availability groups, to be able to help you look at pricing estimates based on discounts you may have from existing contracts. And finally, to be able to run in a lower least privilege model to ensure that you're running in a very secure way to do your assessments for Azure Migrate. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's session and have enough information to find your direction, to build a plan, to take advantage of what Azure SQL has to offer, to modernize and access your data in ways you never thought possible. Here are some other resources to get you going in that journey. I appreciate your time today.